Afternoons, smell of once upon a times, happy ever afters, villains and heroes. They taste of stories, red crisp scarlet apples catching in teeth, needle-pricked fingers and flowing hair unraveling from tall towers. The wicked, the charming, the heroine, and the night. Afternoons are just right for telling tales, spinning gold, spinning webs, so pull up a seat. Sit on the porch, invite the sun to settle from the long day where heat has wrapped itself and everything slowly sweats, and the light is changing as shadows eat their way along the street, swallowing houses, creeping up lampposts. Pull up a seat, sit for a while, and listen to a story or two. I just want to say thank you to Tree for this great honor. Thank you, Margaret, for the great introduction. And that's a bit of a fable in itself, but thank you, Margaret. And to Colin and Deanna and the rest of the Tree. This is a huge honor, and to read with Karen and David, thank you so much. I was thinking tonight that I would tie the poems that I've chosen more into the idea of storytelling and the thread of just that everyday life. And they all have the same thing in common. They're just a little bit about the small and the ordinary, and perhaps a little bit of what we all know. So I hope you'll enjoy. I might have to move this up, I think. Is that okay? I don't know.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, or I'll hold my papers up.
Okay.
Can you hear me still? Yeah. All right, perfect. I could just use my big teacher voice and, throw it all out. Okay, here we go. Every spring, as the sun ripens and flowers stick small shoots through the ground, my youngest daughter reminds me of the time she picked first blooms from a garden close by. She was 5 then, maybe 6. A barefoot gypsy, long curls and smiles cartwheeling to keep up with her need to run and skip and be outside. Already she must have known summers would grow shorter. In our garden, coaxing the tender green of tulip spears, I turned my back and she was gone, off down the laneway, and before I'd ever even known she'd gone, she was back. A fistful of hyacinth and miniature daffodils, bursting tangerine yellow and sweet. I knew the garden from which they were picked, and that evening her head bowed more from sadness at returning the bunch than shame at being caught. My daughter left the mason jar filled with the flowers, along with her apology. Several days later, the owner of the garden put a note of forgiveness in our mailbox, and neither my daughter nor I remember exactly what she wrote, but we remember the letter was beautifully scribed and spoke of how flowers were to be enjoyed and shared. My daughter reminds me every time we walk past the bobbing daffodils of how she had picked the flowers, but I have never told her of what the owner had confided days later and why she was so content to forgive. Every once in a while, I catch a glimpse of a smile creeping around the curtains, watching my child still running wild in the street, twigs and grasses crowning her hair. The first poems I picked have been inspired by the everyday life of my daughters, and I'm very grateful that they're here tonight, so thanks, girls. And thanks for the yummy dinner. Her sunlight. My 1-year-old is planting her feet in a pool of sunshine, the shadow of her tiny body fluttering through the warmth like a butterfly ready to land. She is mesmerized by the falling petals of light, bends to smell them, touch them, pick them. Her feet taste the custard pool, shadow eating sunlight, until it seems to have gone and she floats to the floor. sinks so close to the ground, face pressed, body curled around the buttery yellow splashes, a comma at the end of an unfinished poem. Counting swans. On a recent trip to Toronto, my child becomes obsessed with counting swans. Everywhere we walk along the harbour front, she counts them. I tell her that they find a mate for life and fall in love. She wants to know if that is true, then why is there an odd number? I can only think of one explanation, but it's sad and reminds me of a funeral years before. My friend had been the first to pass in his family of 12, and as the mother and father led the processional, the father wheeling the mother in the chair, the children followed in pairs, the youngest boy without his partner. But today it is spring, and I do not want to talk about death. Count them again, I say. And of course, little girls grow up and they become teenagers and they change, and the tone of the poems change a little bit. And this one is a 16-year-old travels alone for the first time, for Abigail. My third daughter has gone to teenagedom, the spot on the map marked by rolling eyes and words hissed under breath, meant to be heard but barely audible. The destination of pull me, push me, we're not joined at the hips, let me do my own thing. Only last week it seemed she was vacationing in childhood, lolloping on sand dunes, cartwheeling through meadows. Her postcard sentiments, wish you were here, genuine and warm. But that was last week. And now she has traveled to a place I visited twice before with her older sisters. This time, I've chosen not to go. I am staying put as she charts her own unnavigated waters. And on these summer nights, though I can't be sure when she tells me she is sleeping at a friend's house, she is. I don't venture out to join her journey. Rather, the romantic in me wants to wish her bon voyage, hoping she discovers the scent of pines in August and the echo of the river's tongue licking the city's beach while she lies under her own star-pocked sky in a land she has not been to before. And I will wait, trusting that she will come home. So as Margaret had said, I'm a kindergarten teacher as well, so I have the great delight and pleasure of being with children all day long. And so this next poem was actually inspired by those children. And just as a little point of interest, I'm at that school that's in the news all the time right now. You know, that Charles Heltz one, pesticide one? Yeah, anyway. You can talk to me about it at the break. On a spring afternoon, I write poems with my class of 4-year-olds. And a little boy who holds his pencil like a weapon and does not scribe his own name tells me spring is like orange circles. Lots of orange circles that smell like his pockets and never stop. And my little shy girl whispers that the trees grow gold and sing, wish, wish, wish. I'm going to just switch gears for the next couple of poems, and these next few poems I'm actually going to dedicate to all my pansy villagers that are here. It's about one of the villages, and I've been working on a collection probably. Well, not for the last decade, but I met my muse over a decade ago when I first moved on to Pansy Avenue, which is in Old Ottawa South. And she is probably one of the most unlikely muses you would ever meet. And it was a little old lady that lived on the street. And we would spend a lot of time together on her porch. And she would tell me stories, and I turned her stories into poems. And I've been tentatively working on a collection that has a working title of The Martyr Poems, and I'd like to share a couple of them with you tonight. So I'm going to have some water first. So the first of the 3 poems would be the opening of the collection, and then the second 2 poems are from the 4th section. My muse. I am hungry for words and scrounge at Marta's door looking for threads that can be sewn into a poem. My muse is old and tired, memory full, white head bobbing like a peony in early June. She remembers little, but I am desperate, searching everywhere for an almost poem, hoping to find it tucked perhaps in the crumpled tissues that sit like a cat on her lap. I wait for words, not quite forgotten, to spill from the corners of her slackened jaw, in case they fall into her softened fingers and she can pass them on. My muse is old and tired, and I almost give up when I see the threads I'm looking for hanging from the cuff of her tattered sweater, knitted years ago when John was still alive, and they could still spit grief at each other, keeping it fresh and new, so that years later it could almost become the beginning of a poem. Marta is woken in the night by a butter knife prying her eyes, sharpness of the moon slitting her sleep. A craving startles her room, exhaling the scent of onions, and suddenly Marta wants one. Wants to peel its gossamer layers, scrape the threads through her teeth, just to taste the memory of the Russian soldier. These forbidden lusts waken her fully, and now, desperate to pee, she creeps downstairs, an unfamiliar buzzing, an unknown stirring, vibrating close to her core. In the cupboard beside the sink, a basket of yellow onions quietly ages, wrinkled skin falling like the browned pages of a book as Marta unfurls the first unblemished layer. She bites into the ball, ripe and round. Acid pinches her cheeks, and she tastes the Russian soldier, bitter shame spreading in her mouth, down her throat, into her stomach, where vile heat pushes its way up. Marta hangs over the sink, memories, onions, sickness swelling, until it's too much, and it all comes up, leaving only the unfamiliar stirring, beating its wings. In the bedroom upstairs, across the hall from her own room, John paces in his sleep, a dog chasing rabbits dropping between dreams. She hears him keening but stays downstairs, curled on the front mat, squashed against the door. She waits, like a package to be picked up and taken away. Month 9. Marta wakes ready and round, a full moon bursting. In the heat of summer morning, an urge to walk pushes her outside, where everything is alive, and Marta does not yet understand the importance of this day. While birds sing poems into sunshined air, Marta plucks wildflowers down by the river. She will take the heady blossoms to decorate the crib of her unborn child, because in her small sanctuary of books, she has read of the boy who named flowers. How his wooden cradle was laced with vines, phlox, and hemeralicus, how his gift was born through the smallest of touches. Marta hopes to bring such greatness to the child swelling in her core. She thinks of the baby boy, dreaming his names, Rosa and Alyssum, dusky nectar sweetening his breath, forming the classification of flora. Later she will amble home, her dropping hem catching on the dew-dampened grass, reminding her of the pile of sewing she has let grow. For once, she has not tried to fix things. In the afternoon, a young girl, whom Marta does not yet know, will slip into her dreams, long hair flowing, flowers dripping from hands, smile melting Marta's heart. I've been writing a lot about my parents of late and my in-laws of late, and many of the reasons is for my daughters to capture some of their stories and hopefully just preserve some of their memory in a poetic form. And I've been blessed with my parents who have had this amazing love affair for close to 60 years. And it really does give a lot of poetic fodder. So I'm just going to read a couple of poems about my parents. This is in their early days. My father, on having been invited to the rich people down the street's house for dinner, has himself a story to tell. Back then, 16 was leaving age, coming of age, and so my father was considered a man, not a boy, when invited to dinner for the first time to his, at the time, girlfriend's house. Back then, with a class system flourishing to ripeness, this girl and her family were certainly perching on a higher rung of the ladder. And because at this particular time my father was anxious to please and impress, he wore his Sunday best that late summer evening. He made the right sounds, cocked his head in that jaunty way that speaks interest, and answered all questions with a much smoother tone than what was familiar to his slightly common accent. His girlfriend preened proudly as the family enjoyed the fresh-faced young man's company. My father, after all, despite lack of money and certain social status, was well brought up and nicely educated. He would go on to become a pioneer in the world of computers. But on this particular evening, around this particular table, he found himself choosing to do something quite unexpected. A salad had been served. Back then, a delicacy mostly for the rich, and certainly something new for a northern working-class lad. What grandeur the platter must have seemed, with sliced eggs cut like teardrops, edging perfectly round as slices of radish, the pink bleeding into white like the frilly hem of a party frock, blobs of salad cream and ovals of cucumber, small boats in a sea of red cabbage. And in the center, a bed of lettuce, crisp green leaves, cushioning a caterpillar, curled and relaxed. Now, what was my father to do? Back then, pointing out the furry fiend would surely risk suggesting the cook had not done her job, yet leaving the food on his plate would probably infer his yet unsophisticated palate yet unsophisticated palate did not like something that to this family was pretty basic fare. These thoughts must have tumbled over one another, resting on what really was his only choice. With the correct knife and fork perfectly in each of his hands, my father rolled the caterpillar in his blanket and popped it in his mouth. As it turned out, my father never went to the rich people's house for dinner again. But not because he had not been the ideal guest, but rather for his own twist of fortune. As it turns out, several nights later, after the caterpillar incident, the rich girl caught a cold and missed the sea cadet's dance, where my father would meet my mother. First kiss. The kiss you sipped when you pressed your lips to each of my fingertips was so soft and sweet, as if a tame bird were pecking at seed. And when you pressed your lips to mine, hundreds of roses exploded in my mouth. The Imitation Game. My parents entertained the rest of the guests at my father's 87th birthday party. My father tells stories about their days at Manchester University and the work they did on the first computers. My mother, pink-cheeked from wine and laughter, does an imitation of Alan Turing, the man we all know from the latest Hollywood movie. She pushes her glasses above her forehead to rest in her fine grey hair, wind-blown and wild from the wintry weather. My mother insists this is how Turing wore his glasses. My father teases her that she has it all wrong. Turing didn't wear glasses, but he did wear his overcoat buttoned backwards. My father continues with more stories about cheering cowboy magazines and safety pins, while my mother, glasses slipping from her head, keeps insisting she is right. These two people, one missing his kidneys, the other her memory, become the center of attention at the party. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. One more. Thank you, everyone, for just supporting and just being here tonight. And I hope that you've just enjoyed a little bit of Small and Ordinary. And I'm going to finish with one poem that I think that we've all experienced in our lives, whether we were the victim, perpetrator, or just a bystander. It's called Tradition. I vowed I'd never do it. You know, spit on an old piece of discarded tissue and wipe your face. Not the way my mother used to. The big cotton handkerchief she kept stuffed in the bowels of her handbag, encrusted with expelled jewels of waste that clung to old, dry tobacco flakes. Her spit, yellow stained from coffee and non-filtered cigarettes, bathed our chubby little faces, removing sweet stains with one foul swipe. And now I do as she did, and you as I. Hold your breath and puff your cheeks like a cartoon goldfish. Thank you so much.